Hello, welcome to Orthodox Christian Television. My name is Father Christodolos. We're talking about Chios, an island rich in saints, martyrs, history, an island in the Eastern Aegean, a tiny island, but an island that is a giant in size in many areas. And to discuss that with us again is Dr. Miljan Peter Illich. Welcome back, Dr. Illich.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
For those who are watching at home, this is part 5. We're on part 5 of Chios, the Island of Saints. Dr. Illich, I believe we left off in the 4th century?
Oh, that's right. We left off in the 4th century BC, which was the century of the uniting of the Greeks under Alexander the Great. And Chios by that time was a very powerful mercantile state. In fact, Aristotle in his Politics mentions how Chios is so successful as a merchant trading city. It was the richest city of the Greeks. But they weren't only interested in wealth. They were also interested in education. In fact, Chios had the first known co-educational gymnasia, or almost like a high school, in which girls and boys were together, taught how to read and write, and taught the basics of all the sciences and arts that were available in those days.
This was the first co-ed school?
First known, as far as we know, the first known co-ed schools for boys and girls who were citizens of Chios, naturally.
Did this cause any kind of a scandal in the Greek-speaking world?
No, it did not. Actually, it was well accepted, and after that, other places followed it. But Chios set the standard for that for quite a few years. So, a very well-educated body of citizens was developed inside the city of Chios.
What was the name of the school that started the co-ed ed?
Well, it wasn't. There was no specific name. It was established by the city of Chios itself. A number of teachers were hired to teach the boys and girls who were there, but no specific name was given. It was called a gymnasia.
Of Chios?
Of Chios,
the
yes.
gymnasium, so to say, in English.
Right,
which
basically.
is not a place of athletic exercise. The word has now become known as gymnasium, has become a place where you go and work out. But in the ancient world, and still in Greece today, in the Greek-speaking world, gymnasio is more like a secondary school.
Basically, it was something like a high school, you might say, like
Right.
Early version of a high school.
Okay.
And only those who were best taught to be able to learn were allowed to go there, but it expanded to quite a substantial size over the next few centuries.
This is during the time of Alexander.
By the time of Alexander, Chios had that. And as a result, developed a very important intellectual tradition. He had Metrodorus, also in the 4th century, who was a scientist and astronomer. He was one of the first protagonists of the atomic theory. And he also wrote that he believed that there are other worlds out there in the sky. It wasn't just points of light or anything. He believed there were planets out there and stars, and they moved around.
And he was from Chios. He was born in Chios?
He was born and raised and lived in Chios.
So he was the first one to promulgate an atomic theory?
He was one of the first.
One of the first.
One of the first who to promulgate the atomic theory. He wasn't the first, but one of the first to promulgate and develop it and teach it further to other people.
So we have Chios being one of the first to develop democracy, and now Chios is one of the first to develop nuclear or atomic theory.
Mm-hmm.
So we can add that to the list of...
And one of the first to establish public co-educational
co-ed
education system, which was founded by the state.
And one of the first and earliest wine industries.
Well, wine industry, and not only wine, but we mentioned so many other things that they traded in. It was very, very common to find the products of Chios all over the ancient world.
Tell us about Metrodorus' atomic theory. What was he? I mean, how could he possibly know about atoms without telescopes or microscopes or electron microscopes? How is it possible with the naked eye?
Well, it was all based on philosophical analysis, that analyzing substance and matter. It was just a strictly deductive process. He had no scientific instruments to calculate it from. It was strictly deductive, based on analysis and deduction from observation in nature. He deduced that there were small particles of matter, which are basic structures of matter for everything that there is in the world and everything is made out of.
Okay.
Strictly deductive logic.
Interesting. Did Alexander the Great find any interest in?
Oh, he did quite a bit, and in fact, some of Metrodorus' pupils accompanied Alexander on his exploration and invasion and conquest of the ancient world. They traveled with him.
There were some Chians on
That's
board
right.
in Alexander's adventures across the globe.
Quite a few. In fact, there were a number of Metrodorus' students who went to Alexander. And not only that, but 20 large Chian ships, naval ships, accompanied the Macedonian fleet all the way to India.
How did the Macedonian fleet how did including 20 Chian ships, get to India? They had to go through where? There was no Suez Canal.
Well, there was no Suez Canal at that time, but there were other ways of doing it. In fact, there was an ancient canal which wasn't in exactly the same place that the Suez Canal is, but there was an ancient canal built by the pharaohs.
And that's how Alexander got
which
through.
some of the fleet went through there, but another part of the fleet went through the river system, the large rivers in the region, and which emptied out in the Indian Ocean. In fact, right into the Indian Ocean, and went around to India directly through there. That was a common way of doing it, through the river system of the Middle East.
Sometimes I'm amazed. I travel across the United States and I go to small towns and I'll go to a diner and there's a Chian in Tennessee or in some small southern city. I've seen Chians and I'm amazed. But they were, if I went back 2,000 years, I'd find a Chian in India.
Well,
So,
most definitely. Very likely you would find not only Chians, but many other Greeks in India 2,000 years ago, because Alexander established a number of Greek states in India which lasted for centuries.
Which one lasted the longest?
Probably
closest to our time.
Bactria was an mixed Indian-Greek state which lasted until almost the Christian era.
Incredible.
And but there was more than one. There were quite a few, and they were constantly in communication with, especially with the Ionian Greeks, and in fact, there's an Indian scientific book which was written about 2,200 years ago, which said that the Ionians are like gods because their knowledge of astronomy is so vast and so amazing.
So maybe I don't want to digress. I had a question about Indian culture, but let's get back to Chios. We're in the 4th century. Alexander's uniting the Greek world.
He's uniting the Greek world, and he's received quite a bit of support from the Democratic Party of Chios. There was a split in Chios between the oligarchs, who were really not pro-Persian but pro-Carian. Carians were another people who were under Persia, and they were highly influential in Chios at the time. So Alexander sent a letter to Chios ordering the restoration of democratic rule and eviction of the oligarchs. And this was established in Chios. And he also requested that all the exiles be allowed, who were exiled by the oligarchs, be allowed to come back to Chios. And one of the main ones who came back was the historian Theopompus,
right,
who was one of the most important historians of the ancient world. He wrote the Philippica, which was a history of Philip the Great and his court. He lived at the court of Philip, Alexander's father, and he knew Alexander intimately.
And Theopompus, was the last program you mentioned that there was sort of like a rivalry between who was going to accompany Alexander, Theopompus or Aristotle?
It was not that, but something similar. Theopompus was a prime candidate to be tutor of Alexander when Alexander was a boy. Theopompus was at the court at Pella, the Macedonian court at Pella. And he and Aristotle were the final contenders for who would tutor Alexander, and Philip chose Aristotle to be the tutor of Alexander.
And maybe because Aristotle happened to be a native Macedonian.
Well, that could have been a decisive element, the fact that Aristotle was a Macedonian.
Theopompus being a Chian, maybe that had something to do with the choice. But just a quick aside, if anyone considers the Macedonians to be anything other than Greeks, then they'd have to consider Aristotle to be something other than a Greek. And I've never heard anyone go as far as to say that Aristotle was not Greek. Aristotle was a Macedonian, but he's also always known as among the great Greek philosophers.
Well, that's absolutely
Okay,
correct.
let's get back to Chios.
So what happened was when Theopompus came back there, he established himself as one of the leaders of the democratic regime in Chios. But he was a great historian, but highly influential. He's quoted by numerous Roman and other historians in ancient times. But he was also kind of a irascible person who wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even against great danger. And he discovered that Alexander's treasurer, Harpalus, who was a boyhood friend of Alexander's, and Alexander had left him in charge at Babylon, that Harpalus was corrupt and that he was ordering the worship of his mistresses as goddesses. And so Theopompus wrote several letters to Alexander exposing Harpalus for his corruption and his abuse of power, and
in Babylon. This is in the Babylon.
He wrote to Alexander at the camp, and he told, we have quotations, parts of those letters in which he tells Alexander, and he addresses him very familiarly, like an old friend. He says, Alexander, Harpalus is committing sacrilege, is corrupt, and he's taking better care of his mistresses than he's taking care of the veterans who sacrificed themselves for the freedom of Greece. Because when Alexander conquered his conquest all the way to India, it wasn't meant to be just a conquest, straight out takeover. It was meant to free the Greeks from Persian rule and spread Greek culture to the entire area that Alexander covered.
And restore democracy to Chios.
And restore not only Chios, but also other areas. Alexander ordered the restoration of democracy in all the Ionian states.
Okay. So was Theopompus heeded by Alexander?
In fact, he was. And Alexander went after Harpalus. Harpalus fled, but he was so powerful he didn't flee by himself. He fled with 6,000 troops and a huge fortune.
Macedonians.
That were loyal to Harpalus, remained loyal to him, and he actually fled to Athens and took over Athens for a little while.
That's interesting.
And then he was extremely afraid of Alexander, and eventually he fled. He kept on fleeing, and he was killed by his lieutenant, possibly because the lieutenant thought there was no way of escaping the power of Alexander the Great.
Okay.
So Theopompus had a major influence in the world at that particular time.
Okay, should we move on to the next century?
Well, what happened in the next century, Alexander the Great, after his death, his whole empire was split between different areas in which different generals of Alexander ruled. And he has basically, for quite a while, remained independent, but it was under the domination of the Ptolemies of Egypt. As for much of the 3rd century BC, it was influenced by Egypt, but it remained extremely powerful as far as the navy. It had one of the strongest of the Greek navies, and it was also very wealthy, and the educational system continued to produce many highly intellectual and artistic people who were an inspiration to the Hellenic world. In fact, one of the greatest one of the 3rd century was Ariston, who was a famous philosopher at that time, and in fact, almost in a kind of suggestion of the coming of Christianity that we find more and more in Chios. He stressed the importance of ethics, as he was a Stoic, and he stressed as ethics and morality and the right mind as being the most important of all the philosophical studies and learning. Instead of, he moved away from Metrodorus' interest in science. He believed that the right kind of life, the right kind of moral mind was the main thing that we have to find out how to develop and how to use.
Did Chios stay under the sphere of influence of the Ptolemies up and through Cleopatra, the last?
No, it did not. It became totally independent very quickly. And about 250 BC, it joined the Aetolian League, and in fact it was a major member of the council established at Delphi. there were only 12 cities which had the rights to send representatives to Delphi, the Council of Delphi. Chios was one of them for about 60 years. The first representative of Chios there was called Gannon, and he
Sounds like an Irish name.
almost sounds like an Irish name, but it was Gannon. Who knows? Well, there
Maybe
were
the Irish are descendants of the Chians.
You never know. You never know.
Now the Aetolian League. The Aetolian League was independent of the Ptolemies.
It was totally
completely.
independent of Ptolemies.
Like a rival?
It was a league of Greek city-states which established independent
Right, an
region
independent-
in Greece
an
and
alliance.
partly in Ionia. And they were based on Delphi, and Chios was
One of the
to be
states.
there for about 60 years until we have the rise of Macedonia again, descendant of Alexander the Great's family, though not of him personally, Philip V.
Philip V, never heard of him.
Philip V was attempted to revive the Empire of Alexander, became a major conqueror early about 210 BC. But he didn't have Alexander's ability to unite people by giving them a larger cause. Philip V really just wanted to conquer and rule for himself, and when he conquered Greeks, he often massacred Greeks. So he actually took the lead among much of the Greek world in opposing Philip V of Macedon. And in 202 BC, he invaded Chios with a large force. He was the strongest of the Greek
Macedonians.
Macedonians.
Yeah.
He was strongest of the Greek states, and he invaded Chios with a naval force and a large army. And there was very substantial fighting in Chios, but he failed to conquer Chios. Chios had very powerful walls and a very powerful army and a very powerful navy. And in 201 BC,
It's also very difficult to defeat a people when they're defending their homeland, their homes.
well, it often is, but Chios was exceptionally strong and determined to defend itself at this time, and for much of the entire period. And at 201 BC, there was a large naval battle where the Navy...
The following year, 202, because people get confused. 202 BC,
the
Philip
land
V
invasion of
land
Chios,
made a land invasion of Chios, and then a year later, in 201 BC,
right? There was a naval battle of Chios, which is called the Battle of Chios,
interesting.
and in which the navy of Chios with allies, especially Rhodes and also Pergamum, which was a Hellenistic state in Asia Minor, defeated the navy of Philip of the Fifth of Macedon. And
And this was a combined force of
a combined
Ionians.
force of
Ionians.
allied navies in which Chios took a leading role, and most of the Macedonian fleet had over 200 ships, and most of them were destroyed. And with it, and Philip was this was the beginning of the end of Philip V. At this particular time, as Philip was rising to power, Rome was also rising to power, and there was a possibility that Philip might unite with Hannibal, who was also contemporary, and they tried to unite and crush Rome, but
Hannibal being the Carthaginian
the Carthaginian
king.
ruler of Carthage in North Africa who invaded Rome. So on one side it was Philip, on the other side it was Hannibal, and Rome was trying to survive the wars against Philip and Hannibal at the same time. But
These were the Punic Wars, right?
Punic Wars were the ones involving Hannibal. The ones involving Philip were called the Macedonian Wars.
Interesting. Very
Second
interesting.
Macedonian War specifically.
Okay.
And
Why not?
And basically, due to the Ionian states uniting, Philip failed, and Rome was established as the up-and-coming power in the European region, the Hellenistic region. And very quickly afterwards, we find an alliance between Chios and Rome.
Really, Chios went right to Rome and made an alliance.
It was an alliance with Rome.
Alone? Is this a unilateral alliance?
It was, Chios and Rome made an alliance in return for Roman protection of Chian naval trade, and also allowing Chian mercantile trade to go into Roman regions, and this was really the beginning of Roman expansion in the Ionian area, in the Hellenistic area.
So can we say that Chios sort of gave an in to Rome to come into the Greek-speaking world? By the way, a lot of people subscribe to the theory that the Romans were really not that different from the Greeks, so that to have an alliance with the Romans was really not making an alliance with an alien race or an alien culture. The Romans had adopted and adapted so many Greek, well, the Greek religion, the Greek culture, the dress, architecture, etc., so that the Romans and the Greeks were sort of almost one kind of culture. It was a Greco-Roman world. So but the Chians made a unilateral alliance with Rome again, for protection against who, though?
Well,
the Macedonians?
The Macedonians were still a possible danger, and there were other areas and powers in there, Hellenistic powers still, who were quite strong. The Seleucids were there. The Ptolemies were still around. They were to be around for almost 2 more centuries. So there were many potential dangers. But it was a very advantageous alliance for Chios for a long time. And in fact, by 193 BC, Chios became a major Roman naval base, not as a colony of Rome, not as a conquered area, but as a freely allied state together with Rome. And I would say, as we go on, and I'll explain even more, I think you're right that Roman civilization and Greek civilization were very similar, and these were, they became even more similar as time went on. But I think the alliance of Chios helped to make that similarity grow as time went on, and helped to make the Roman and Greek Hellenistic system spread throughout Europe and the Middle East and North Africa.
The known world.
And as such, it established the basis in which Christianity could spread about 200 years later. If it wasn't for the fact that the Roman Empire was so well established that it was possible for the apostles and Christians to spread through this whole area, to travel, to preach, to teach.
Well, sure. If you had,
Christianity could not have spread as well as it did. If
Christianity had been born in an area like the Americas of that era, or even in sub-Saharan Africa of that era, or Siberia of that era, you wouldn't have seen Christianity spread like it did. You had, like you said, an organized system of communications, of roads, of intellectuals,
laws,
of language and laws, a civilization. To put it short.
A common civilization in which Christianity could spread, in which Christianity could have a common ground that people will understand. Because once Roman civilization was established, it was possible for somebody from Asia Minor to communicate with somebody in England.
So it sounds to me now, we only have a few minutes left, it sounds to me like, Peter, you're saying that it was thanks to the Chians that Christianity spread throughout the world.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that they certainly helped to establish the Roman power.
Of course, I'm just...
which allowed Christianity to spread.
Sometimes people watch this program and they think I'm trying to say that the world wouldn't exist without Chios, and of course we're not saying that. We're just trying to give credit where it's due, and we, of course, have some levity now and then. I'm being signaled that there's only 2 minutes left. I'm getting the idea from you that the ancient Greek world, it was not one country, it wasn't one nation. A lot of people get the idea that Greece was Greece, and there always was a Greece. And as you know, and most people don't know, there wasn't a Greece until 1831. There was never a place called Greece until 1831, which was only 100 and something years ago. The ancient world was, the ancient Greek-speaking world was a series of nations, city-states. Chios, Athens, Macedonia, Pella, Sparta, Delphi,
Thebes,
literally hundreds. Alexander, and in several continents.
That's right.
Europe, Asia,
Africa. Yes.
So, and then later, as far as India, Bactria. So all these nations were, when we hear that the Macedonians fought the Chians and the Chians made an alliance with the Romans, it sounds like, well, how can Greek go against Greek? Well, they weren't Greeks. These were Chians. These were Macedonians. These were Athenians, who happened to have a similar culture and a similar language and religion. And later they became a nation, the Roman nation, later. So the Greek culture of the Roman Empire, the Greek and Roman culture of the Greek culture and Greek language of the Roman Empire was something that the Chians helped to light a spark to and bring into the the Aegean world.
And in fact, at this particular time, this was the first contact essentially between Rome and Chios, but in the next century we'll find another connection between Rome and Chios in which literally the Chios saved Rome.
We'll take it from Chians saved Rome. That's
literally, yes.
I never heard of that. Well, people watching, thank you for watching. Please call us, please email us. And Chiotes, you never call, you never email. What's going on with the Chiotes, the Chians? Everybody else, I have Irish people, African people, everybody calling and emailing except Chiotes. What's going on here? Come on. Okay, thank you for watching. Thank you, Dr. Illich.
Oh, thank you.